millions starved and emigrated. The year is 1845. Ireland, a land of verdant fields and ancient stories, is a country teetering on the brink. For generations, the Irish peasantry has subsisted on a single crop, the potato. It's a hardy, reliable food source, capable of feeding a family on a small plot of land. But this reliance has created a precarious dependence, a single point of failure in the complex equation of survival. The potato, introduced from the New World centuries earlier, has become inextricably linked to the fate of the Irish people. They know nothing of what lurks on the horizon, an invisible enemy carried on the wind, a blight that will rewrite the history of the nation in letters of starvation and despair. There's a strange discoloration appearing on the potato leaves, a sign dismissed at first as a minor ailment. But the discoloration spreads, a creeping stain across the landscape, a harbinger of something far more sinister. The first reports were localized, whispers carried on the wind from village to village. Farmers noticed black spots appearing on the leaves of their potato plants, followed by a rapid decay of the tubers themselves. The potatoes, once firm and plentiful, turned into a rotting, stinking mush. Panic began to set in, but the authorities, largely composed of wealthy English landowners, remained dismissive. They attributed the blight to unusual weather patterns, a temporary setback that would surely pass. Some even suggested that the Irish were exaggerating the problem, driven by their inherent laziness and tendency to complain. But the blight continued to spread, an unstoppable plague consuming the very foundation of Irish society. Markets began to empty, and the first signs of hunger appeared in the eyes of the children. As the potato crop failed, desperation grew. Families watched helplessly as their food stores rotted away, leaving them with nothing to eat. The British government, preoccupied with maintaining order and protecting the interests of the landed gentry, responded with a mixture of indifference and inadequate relief measures. Public works projects were initiated, providing meager wages for backbreaking labor. But the food produced was often insufficient to feed the starving masses. Soup kitchens were established by charitable organizations, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the crisis. The Irish pleaded for help, but their cries were often met with deaf ears and accusations of idleness and dependency. The shadow of starvation lengthened across the land, a grim reaper claiming victims with each passing day. Rumors began to circulate, whispers of conspiracies and hidden agendas. Some accused the British government of deliberately withholding food supplies, using the famine as a means to reduce the Irish population and consolidate their control over the land. Others pointed to the wealthy landowners who continued to export grain and livestock from Ireland, even as their tenants starved. There were stories of food riots and attacks on grain ships, desperate acts of survival in a world turned upside down. The social fabric of Ireland began to unravel as families were torn apart by hunger and despair. Trust eroded, replaced by suspicion and resentment. The famine was not just a natural disaster, it was a social and political catastrophe, exposing the deep fault lines of Irish society. The initial investigation into the blight focused on natural causes. Scientists examined the affected potatoes, searching for a microscopic culprit. They eventually identified the pathogen, Phytophthora infestans, a water mold that thrives in damp conditions. But the discovery of the pathogen did little to alleviate the suffering of the Irish people. The focus remained on providing immediate relief, but the efforts were hampered by bureaucratic incompetence, political indifference, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the scale of the crisis. The British government clung to a laissez-faire economic policy, believing that the market would eventually correct itself. But in a land ravaged by famine, the market offered little solace to the starving. The turning point came with the realization that the potato blight was not a localized phenomenon. It was a widespread epidemic affecting potato crops across Europe, while other countries implemented effective measures to control the spread of the disease and provide relief to their populations. The British government's response in Ireland remained woefully inadequate. This disparity fueled the growing sense of injustice and resentment among the Irish people, who felt abandoned by their rulers. The famine became a symbol of British oppression, a stark reminder of the powerlessness of the Irish in their own land. Further investigation revealed that the British government was aware of the severity of the crisis much earlier than they publicly admitted. Official reports detailing the extent of the potato crop failure were suppressed, and pleas for greater assistance were ignored. The motivation behind this cover-up remains a subject of debate among historians. Some argue that it was driven by a desire to maintain the status quo and avoid disrupting the economic interests of the landed gentry. Others suggest that it was rooted in a deep-seated prejudice against the Irish, a belief that they were inherently inferior and undeserving of assistance. Whatever the reason, the cover-up had devastating consequences, prolonging the famine and exacerbating the suffering of the Irish people. As the famine deepened, emigration became the only option for many. Desperate families crammed onto overcrowded ships, hoping to find a new life in America or other distant lands. These coffin ships, as they were known, were often poorly maintained and disease-ridden. Many passengers died during the voyage, their bodies tossed overboard into the cold Atlantic. Those who survived arrived in their new homes weak and impoverished, facing discrimination and hardship. But despite the challenges, they clung to the hope of a better future, carrying with them the memories of the famine and the determination to build a new life for themselves and their descendants. The escalation of the famine also saw a dramatic rise in evictions. Landlords, eager to clear their land for more profitable uses, forcibly evicted tenants who were unable to pay their rent. These evictions were often brutal and inhumane, leaving families homeless and destitute. Many sought refuge in workhouses, overcrowded and disease-ridden institutions that offered little more than basic sustenance. The workhouses became symbols of the famine's cruelty, places of despair and death. The Irish people were trapped in a cycle of poverty and suffering, with little hope of escape. The government's response, or lack thereof, was not without internal dissent. Some British politicians and philanthropists recognized the severity of the situation and advocated for more comprehensive relief efforts. However, their voices were often drowned out by those who prioritized economic interests and viewed the famine as an opportunity to reshape Irish society. The debates within the British government reflected the deep divisions within British society regarding Ireland and its place within the empire. The famine exposed the hypocrisy and contradictions of British rule. undermining the legitimacy of the government in the eyes of many. Years passed, and slowly the potato blight subsided. But the scars of the famine remained etched on the Irish landscape and in the collective memory of the Irish people. The population of Ireland was decimated, reduced by over 2 million through death and emigration. The social and political landscape was transformed with the rise of Irish nationalism and the growing demand for home rule. The famine became a defining moment in Irish history, a symbol of suffering, resilience, and the enduring struggle for justice. The legacy of the famine continues to shape Irish identity and the relationship between Ireland and Britain. To this day, the final reckoning came not in the form of legal justice, but in the slow, grinding force of historical perspective. The British government never formally apologized for its handling of the famine, but the weight of evidence has made it increasingly difficult to deny the culpability of the authorities. Historians have meticulously documented the government's inaction, its inadequate relief efforts, and its willingness to prioritize economic interests over the lives of the Irish people. The famine stands as a stark reminder of the consequences of indifference, prejudice, and the abuse of power. The chilling irony lies in the fact that Ireland, even during the worst years of the famine, continued to export vast quantities of food to Britain. Grain, livestock, and other foodstuffs were shipped across the Irish Sea, while the Irish people starved. This stark contrast between abundance and scarcity highlights the systemic inequalities that lay at the heart of the crisis. The famine was not simply a natural disaster. It was a man-made tragedy, a consequence of political choices and economic policies that prioritized the interests of the few over the needs of the many. The fields of Ireland yielded sustenance, but that sustenance was not for the Irish, and so the Irish potato famine remains, a dark stain on the pages of history, a story of unimaginable suffering, of a people brought to their knees by hunger and oppression. But it is also a story of resilience, of the enduring spirit of the Irish people who survived the famine and went on to build a new life for themselves and their descendants. The memory of the famine serves as a warning, a reminder of the importance of social justice, human compassion, and the need to never forget the lessons of the past. The whispers of the starving still echo across the generations, a haunting testament to a tragedy that should never be repeated.